Okay, a bit about this evening and what it's about. So a poet that I admire, Andrea Gibson, who is also a cancer patient, said that since receiving their diagnosis, what they discovered was that people expect them to have an exciting bucket list filled with dramatic escapades, whereas what they found was the most magical moments, the most precious ones, are the simplest ones. And they shared this one. For me to hold the hospital lift doors open for a stranger, minutes after I've received bad news. What a generous moment. Hope and humanity, right there. Hope and humanity are important words, big words, words that convey fortitude and buoyancy, and we need those in the NHS right now. This evening is about hope and humanity. It's also about connection. So I'm going to invite you to connect with someone, perhaps someone you don't know yet. I'm going to invite you to turn to someone sitting near you and ask them the question, what does hope mean to you? What does hope mean to you? Ask someone sitting near you. Tonight is exploring hope and humanity through the eyes of our storytellers. Why stories? Well, because stories offer us the chance to process, to understand, to empathise. They offer us new perspectives, they challenge us, they make us think. Stories matter because they're like signposts, telling us what's important to the storyteller. Of all the words they could have chosen, of all the stories they could have told, these are the ones. One of the things you'll know if you work in healthcare is that it's rarely a solo enterprise. We need each other. And we need to really work together and to understand each other. At this point, I'd like to appreciate two giants in the field of communication, Nancy Klein and Michael West. Nancy, because she offers us the concept of listening to understand, not just listening to get ready to reply, which is our routine human default, but listening to understand, which encapsulates listening with fascination without interruption. And Michael, because he's gifted us such an important body of work, examining the space that compassion takes up in the workplace and its impact on teams. Compassion towards self, compassion towards others, and compassion within teams that has a direct benefit on patient outcomes and patient experience. So this event is really an evocation of those two strands of thinking, listening to understand with compassion. Of course, we're here to listen, to receive, and hopefully some of tonight's content will resonate with you, but we're also here to give our storytellers the gift of being heard, to bear witness to the stories they've chosen to tell, the words they use, the signposts they show us. In this way, we honour their intention, we witness their hope, we respect their humanity. So, we've got a wonderful lineup for you tonight. We've got 6 storytellers, poet Faye Marshall, artist Max Narurka. You can see Max's artwork up here and also outside on the concourse. He's created bespoke pieces for tonight on the theme of hope and humanity. You'll be able to talk to him afterwards about them. You can also talk to Faye, published poet, as well as palliative care nurse, who will be here to discuss her work afterwards and is going to perform a piece of spoken word because of its resonance with the themes of hope and humanity. Before we get started, finally, I'd like to thank everyone that's been part of this endeavour, all our storytellers, all our story coaches, Faye and Max, our front of house team who've done a wonderful job, Sam, Simon and Andrew from the Crucible Theatre, Sheffield, who've helped us prepare, and the University of Sheffield, specifically Francesca Baker, who's done a wonderful job helping me, and Professors Mark Strong and Sheila Francis, who have been incredibly generous in hosting this event tonight and offering us this space. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first story coach, Ian.
Thank you, Susie. Good evening. My name's Ian. I'm delighted to introduce Alice, with whom I've had the pleasure and privilege of working over the last 6 months. Alice enjoys singing, she enjoys running, but she has great difficulty at just sitting still. Alice.
So much of the work of a GP is unquantifiable. It doesn't fit into boxes, and it's not measured. There's a quote I heard in a talk I went to recently given by a GP that said, when you're working outside general practice looking in, it's really hard to understand. And when you're working in general practice looking out, it's really hard to explain. What is it that we do that takes up so much of our time? What keeps us going when the hours are long and the work sometimes feels overwhelming? A bit beyond the blood pressures, the chest infections, the referrals, and the chronic disease management. This story is about that. The spaces in between. And about what I feel GPs do best. Being flexible, being creative, being caring, and working in relationship with patients and families in what matters to them. For several years, I did the Friday afternoon on call at the GP practice in which I worked. I had a hate relationship with that part of my week. Everything felt different on a Friday. There wasn't a clinic tomorrow to slot you into just to check something, and I couldn't ring you up in 2 days' time and just check that the treatment I gave you for that asthma exacerbation had actually helped. And the other professionals I spoke to in hospitals and other agencies were always helpful, but more stretched and more stressed than on other days. This particular Friday, it seemed, was the same as most other Fridays. I started the day at my desk, a cup of strong black coffee within reach, tapping through a list of lab results. When I heard the ding 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 of the bell in reception, being rung by one of the receptionists valiantly with increasing urgency and volume as she tried to gather that day's team for the briefing meeting we held every day before the start of surgery. Sitting, looking at my colleagues sitting in their scrubs on their plastic green benches, I realised there weren't many of us. It was going to be a busy day. It was the start of the school summer holidays, and several colleagues were off having a well-deserved break. The day continued largely as expected until in the late morning, the practice received a call to say that one of our very elderly patients had been discharged overnight to die at home. The death was expected to be soon. He'd come home at the very end of his life to be amongst his family and community. The phone call was from a family member. They wanted to ensure that a GP would be available immediately after death to issue the death certificate, to enable him to be buried according to the rituals and customs of the Islamic faith, quickly after death. This is something as a practice we really try to facilitate. We recognise the importance of this to the health of our patients and community. In the definition of health, we learned as medical students that health is bio, psycho, social, and spiritual. Now, the administration around death is complex. Can a doctor issue a death certificate? Does the coroner need to be involved? Does the paperwork to do with the cremation need to be completed? And at the time of this particular case, our practice was involved in a pilot, which has since become mandatory, along with other changes, to involve an independent medical examiner in establishing the cause of death. It is yet more complicated when a death certificate is needed early for a faith burial, because the family needs to be supported in how to access a death certificate out of hours if that's necessary, and a GP needs to be available to issue the certificate. And though I've been involved in cases like this before, I haven't done it frequently enough to feel confident in it. And so, at my desk, with my coffee, I scrolled through guidelines and practice documents on our practice intranet and made various phone calls to ensure I was following procedures and that I could do what the family needed. In this particular case, the death certificate couldn't be issued easily without the GP visiting the patient before they died, the GP that was to issue the certificate. I was by now the only doctor in practice that day, and although I could visit the patients at home, I was going on my own family holiday that weekend and wouldn't be available to issue the certificate if the patient dies after I left. By now, I'm feeling stressed and hassled. I'm feeling the weight of trying to meet the needs of the family, really wanting to meet the needs of the family, but in a situation I'm feeling unconfident in, and while trying to juggle the rest of my day. I'm fortunate I work as part of a highly committed, dedicated and compassionate practice team, and after making a phone call to a colleague at home on her day off, we came up with a plan that we thought would support the patient and provide what they needed. I visited the patients at home, receiving a warm welcome into the house. Entering through a side door into the kitchen, ahead of me, a sea of shoes lined up against the wall. I experienced that familiar uncertainty experienced on many home visits. Should I take my shoes off? It felt respectful, but I was never sure if it was expected. I had a very inconsistent approach to this particular conundrum. Often depended what socks I had on, if any, and whether I painted my toenails. On this particular day, it did feel appropriate, and I slipped off my shoes and I added them to the line. Walking into the main room of the house, I was immediately struck by the light pouring through the window and onto the bed of the patient. The bed had been turned across the room so the dying man could face another. The house was full of people, but felt calm, felt reverent. As I crossed the room, I could see the lips of the people around the bed moving, murmuring, as I now know, reciting passages of the Quran. Behind me, people sat on sofas, comforting each other and talking quietly. I introduced myself to the family, explained what I needed to do, gaining their consent. And then I did what might in any other situation seem wholly inappropriate. I pulled out my mobile phone, that intrusive device that so many of us have a love-hate relationship with. I made a video call to my colleague at home. I introduced her to the family and showed her the dying man, lying in his bed, bathed in light. By doing this, according to the guidelines of the time, we were ensuring that she would be able to issue a death certificate if I wasn't available. On my way back to the practice, on the phone with my colleague, we reflected about what a privilege it had been being in that space, witnessing the strength of faith and the beauty of that family's goodbye. Back at the practice, my afternoon continued. Processing urgent lab results, urgent patient queries and appointments, staff queries, endless prescription requests, and yes, probably yet more coffee. It was just a few hours later when a member of the family arrived at the surgery to say that the gentleman had died. And could I visit, confirm his death, and issue a death certificate? I returned to the house and entered the same room, filled with the same people, with the same calm, reverent atmosphere, but subtly changed now. There was no longer light pouring through that window, even though the day remained bright. The gentleman was being washed by male members of the family according to the Islamic rituals that follow death. And I undertook the medical ritual that follows death that so many people here in this room will have done before. Took up my stethoscope and I listened and I felt for signs that life had ended. Listening for the silence of an absent heartbeat. Listening for the silence of a missing breath. Feeling the stillness of an absent pulse. And watching for the absence of life in his eyes. Now I could issue a death certificate and he could be buried. There's so many reasons why this experience has remained with me. The juxtaposition of the administrative overwhelm in the surgery and the peace and the calm and the beauty of the family and community's final goodbye. The oddness of introducing that intrusive technology into that simple, calm environment. But I think the reason that this has stayed with me most is that sheer privilege of being witness to the rituals and customs of another faith group, done with such respect and love, and of being connected to that. None of this is quantifiable. None of this will appear in any quality and outcome framework document. None of it will be in any NHS England reporting system. But this is some of what GPs do. This is why I do it. And this is some of what exists in the spaces in between.
Born in Bristol, our next storyteller wisely moved north to start her medical life. Romina thrives on yoga, writing, and gallons of Yorkshire tea. Please give her a very warm welcome.
It was warm and sunny at mid-May, Monday morning. I'm lying in my very messy garden on one of those big rattan lounges. The grass is already that tinge of yellowy brown from an unusually dry spring. I feel the glow of the sun shining down on my skin, and the birds are singing their morning melody. Now, it's pretty unusual for me to be relaxing outside on a Monday morning. I'd normally be rushing around, up and down hospital corridors, seeing and assessing patients, and answering those incessant bleeps. But on this Monday morning, I'm not, because it's my first day of maternity leave. I've got 2 weeks to go until the big day when my life will change forever. But for this moment, I'm just taking it all in. A lot of people rush around on their early days of maternity leave, making sure they've got everything ready. I'm not that kind of person. Everything was already done and under control. Sorted. I've got nothing left to do but just wait. I am a bit of a nerd though. I love reading and learning and finding new things to think about. I can't read fiction. I can only read things that are real and true. To give some context, my mum tells me I spent my childhood reading the dictionary. So it's no surprise that I'm sat on my first day of maternity leave reading academic journals, The Lancet, Nature, the Journal of Science. Yeah, I know how to party. I come across one article that really stops me in my tracks. It meticulously describes how different, unrecognisable even, our world will be in the coming years if we fail to protect it. It painted a picture that was so bleak, so barren, so broken. I paused, I read it again, and then, to be honest, I panicked. It led me to have a moment of realisation of how fragile and delicate the world was. As I'm having a bit of a doom spiral, my baby decides to remind me he's there. A firm, strong kick in the ribs. I'm then met with a sense of overwhelm, guilt and responsibility about bringing a new child into the world given the planetary crisis I'm reading about. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm holding my firstborn in my arms, looking into his beautiful eyes, smelling his new baby smell. And I make a promise to him that I'll do everything I can to protect his future. But at first, that was just not to be. Those first few weeks are a blur, a haze of nappy changing, feeding, pavement pounding in the pouring rain, trying to get him to sleep. Those exhausting weeks are a struggle for any new parent, and I was no exception. I could barely put a wash on, let alone save the world. But things start to get a little easier, and the thing that helps me is I start to see the world through his eyes, the innocent eyes of a child seeing things for the first time. The trees are greener, the sky is bluer, the flowers are prettier, and the hooting owl that nests in our garden is a little bit louder. And it helps me realise just how much beauty there is in the world, and crucially, just how much there is to save. I take time with my little boy to appreciate the natural world, the crunching sound of snow as he plays in it for the very first time, the beauty in the seasons as they change colour, with the autumn leaves perfect for frolicking in, as he throws them high, giggling as they land on his curly hair. The magical birds and their murmurations as they flock from one side of the sky to the other. To this day, my son loves nature. Whenever he sees something he thinks is beautiful, he asks me to take a picture. I've got so many photos of sunrises and sunsets on my phone. And ladybirds. He's a big fan of ladybirds. The spark of appreciation for the natural world allows me to then comfortably make changes in my personal life. I become more considerate for the things I buy, the way I travel, the things I eat. And these small changes give me a sense of control. Like, maybe I can do this. Maybe we can do this. And it really helps with my sense of pure grief for what we're at risk of losing if we don't act. This sense of control lasts until my first day back at work after maternity leave, where I feel as though I've been catapulted into a moral dilemma. I thought I'd chosen a career that involved saving lives. But am I doing as much good as I think I am? Am I really first doing no harm? As the days pass on my obs and gynae placement, I notice things I hadn't really noticed before. The metal forceps labelled single use, which I just have to throw away, shuddering at the noise they make as they clank into the bin. The nitrous oxide that stays on the planet longer than the children it helps bring into the world. And those plastic, turtle-killing aprons that snap in my hands before I can even put one on, and which, quite frankly, don't protect anyone from anything. And those just-in-case investigations we sometimes order, even though we know our patient probably doesn't need it. I'm back to a sense of overwhelm, and I don't know where to start. So I start where any sensible person starts. I Google it. I Google climate change and health, healthcare sustainability, greener healthcare, anything I can think of, convinced I'm the first person to have ever thought about this. Turns out I'm not. fact, it turns out, at that time, a small number of people have been campaigning about this hard for years. In those people, I find my community, my people. And I soon realised how alone I've been feeling, worrying about the future for my boy. But I'm no longer alone. I'm no longer the only green in the room. I meet some of the best, most generous, caring clinicians I have ever met who see the beauty in the world just like my little boy does. And it helps me realise the power and joy of community and collective action. It also helps me find my purpose, which is educating others in this work. The first event I held, I wished for just 10 people to show up, but to my surprise, over 100 did. 100 clinicians who, like me, wanted to care for people and planet. And it helped me realise I didn't need to be an expert to lead. I just needed to care. And every day I'm meeting more and more people that also care. The best thing is the friendships I've made along the way. Half the time it doesn't even feel like work. It just feels like hanging out with friends. Fast forward a few years. My son's 5 now. I take him to a protest in London to demand we protect nature. Now my son's been to many protests over the years, so he is quite the pro. So much so that when he has a show and tell at school, he takes his latest homemade placard in to show his friends. We get the train to London for the march. Now, truth be told, I'm pretty stressed about this particular event because I helped organise it, or at least the health block of it, where we wanted to show a united voice that protecting nature is crucial for health. We arrive in Park Lane for the march, with the luscious grass of Hyde Park to our right. It's busy and lively, and there's so many people dressed in different bits of nature. There's an octopus, an owl, some birds, a few fish, and one sign in particular which catches my eye which says, less species, more species, which makes me chuckle, so I relax. Our health bot gathers at our meeting place, for a sea of green and blue scrubs, all with professional labels on, saying nurse, physio, occupational therapist, retired GP, medical student, so people can tell we represent health. Those of us at the front of the block are holding a blue banner with white writing on that says, our health means a healthy planet. My son's standing in front of the banner, in a hat made of leaves, his nature crown, as he calls it, and these little green scrubs with a label on the front which says, future doctor. To be honest, it's quite a stretch, as he currently says he wants to be a train driver. But anyway, he's at the front, in his scrubs, banging his tambourine and blowing his whistle, along with all the other protesters merrily singing songs and banging drums. It's kind of all we can start and stop marching, depending on the movement in the very busy crowd. He's chanting the chants we practiced on the train over. You can't have health without nature, he bellows. And one of his absolute favourites, I can't vote, but I can protest. I realise that I'm watching my son have the absolute time of his life. He is laughing and taking selfies with fellow protesters on his little camera and handing out nature-themed stickers to passers by, apart from the ladybird stickers, which he obviously keeps to himself. A young woman, a fellow protester in blue scrubs with the label pharmacist on, leans into me and says, you can see his medical school application now. I led a protest for nature, aged 5. And in that moment, I let out a huge laugh, like a proper belly laugh that filled my heart with joy. And I looked at my son and at my people, my tribe of health professionals, waving our placards and chanting our chants about the need to protect nature in the name of health, and I realised, in that moment, on that day, that we, all of us, are the change we've been waiting for. And while I still feel waves of grief for what we may have already lost, I feel a palpable sense of realising that it's very possible to turn our grief to joy and to live a happy hilarious life while fighting hard for the things that matter to us all, and living a life that values nature for what it is, a part of all of us.
Thanks, Susie. It's my absolute joy to welcome Diane and introduce Diane to you. Diane is originally from Nigeria. She's been living and working in the UK for the last 5.5 years. She's married with 3 children who she describes as charming. And I think the thing that most impressed me about Diane is her story, which speaks of honesty and humility and a great deal of courage. So please give a warm Sheffield and surrounding areas welcome to Diane.
The day started very well. The sun was bright, shiny, and warm. Enough for someone from Nigeria to have a leisure walk into the hospital with all the usual double layers and winter jackets. I felt so alive and happy. The weather lifted my spirits, but beyond the weather, I had just completed a very intense exam, and now I was ready for a break. The last few years I felt like a roller coaster, from selling up most of my things to relocate to a new country, to learning new ways of living and working, to raising my kids without the usual support of the extended family. I know I was doing this for my career and my family, but some days it felt like a lot. Back in Nigeria, I was used to being in charge of the world at work and being in charge of my life at home. And for the first time in so many years, I felt like I was back to being the star of my own story. I got into the hospital, changed into my clothes, and settled in nicely. The department wasn't busy. I could see my colleagues popping in and out of the cubicles, attending to sick people. I really loved working here. It was more than just the bright colors on the wall and the design. It was also about the warmth, the banter, the feel of just being here. It felt like home, and I wanted to be here as long as I could. Really, my day was going on so well until it wasn't. I was sat behind a computer reading up on the next patient when a senior member of the team walked to me and said, "Have you got a minute, Diane?" My heart skipped a bit. I felt so unsettled. If I've learned anything at all, it is that 1 minute talks last more than a minute. And I rarely good news. This was an exception. A patient I had seen and sent home had come to harm, and there was going to be an investigation. I felt a rush of emotions. First, it was denial. This couldn't be possible. I was a medical god on this. Back in Nigeria, the condition was so common that it's so unimaginable to miss this. Then I thought about the patients. What if they died? How do I face their parents? How do I cope with the shame and guilt for the rest of my life? What if I was struck off? What if I had to leave? I just didn't put my thoughts on one thing because so many thoughts dashed through my mind. I could feel the fear in my throat. The worry was so overwhelming. I tried to convince myself that the patient would be fine. But at that moment, I couldn't believe anything my mind told me. Hurriedly, I sat at the computer and pulled up the case note, staring at my writing, taking in every bit of the medical consultation. Though filled with fear and with worry, I heard the voice of my colleague who had noticed me. "Are you really okay, Diane?" they asked. I gave a summary of the event and waited for their verdict. But there was no judgment. Instead, they said to me, "I think you should take a step outside, get some air and water." It sounded so sincere that I decided to take the advice. As I left, I could hear her voice saying, "You're a sensible doctor, Diane." While my mind said to me, "You should have known better, Diane." I suppose I skipped the class on self-compassion. As I walked away from the department, I felt so drained and defeated. I had just come to a point of rest, and now this. What still not knowing the true condition of the patient made it so difficult. Lots of worst-case scenarios ran through my mind as fear wrapped its warm cloak all over me. I walked back to the department feeling so dejected, desperately avoiding eye contact with my colleagues. I felt like a fraud. I convinced myself I could stay to the end of the shift rather than go home and just let out all the fear and frustration. The rest of the day was a blur. Filled with fear, I asked for second opinion on every patient I saw. I didn't feel like a safe doctor. I didn't even feel like a sensible person. I couldn't trust my advice. Neither could I make the day go any faster. This time around, I didn't walk. I sat in the back seat of the taxi, grateful for the solitude of the night and the darkness. I was far away from my family in another town, in a rented apartment. I let myself in through the back door, tiptoed up the stairs, opened the room door to my room, sat on my tiny bed, and I let it all out. The fear, the frustration I've kept in all day came flooding as I tried to keep my cry quiet. I cried the whole night. I could see the name on the face of the patient, and I kept wishing I had done more to keep the patient safe. The next morning, I was in no state to go to work. I had a throbbing headache, and I looked dreadful. I ran into the department and I said I couldn't come in. The consultant reassured me that I was okay. They had enough staffing, and I was okay to take as much time as I needed to get better. But then minutes later, I got a text message on my phone. It was from the consultant. They had noticed something was off, and she sent a message saying, "Are you really okay, Diane? You do not sound like yourself." They had picked up there was more up with me than just I have a sore throat. She offered to have a chat if I wanted to talk about anything and support. And I'm glad I took that invitation and opened up. They gave me some support and got more people to support me. All this love, care, and support, and I've been in the department just a few months. It made me feel seen, known, valued. They trusted me. I was told the patient was doing okay. We were getting the right inputs from the right specialist, and that was reassuring. When it got to time to leave and move on for my training, I was really sad to go. I wanted to remain there forever. The culture of care and compassion in the department made me start thinking I wanted to be a specialist in that area. You see, that year was a very dark year for me, because shortly after this, I realized I had failed the exam, and my mom had a diagnosis of cancer. These are things big enough to break anyone. But no, it didn't break me, because every day I turned up at work, I was met by kind faces who kept reminding me I was an amazing colleague. Walking side by side with these people, I overcame shame and guilt. I gained the courage to undertake courses on medical error, and I became bold enough to teach about this medical error. So now, I've gone from being a very reserved person to being man enough to notice my colleagues, to know them, and to ask them, are you really okay, while giving them the gift of my listening ears? Thank you.
Now it's my joy to introduce Faye, who, as I said before, is a published poet as well as a palliative care nurse. It's wonderful that you can join us tonight, Faye. Thank you.
Hours after midnight, near a field at sunrise, warehouse laughter, cheap perfume highs, footsteps lifting, crowded corridors, beeps in the distance, sticky floors, and swinging two-way double doors. The place you come to lose your mates, the place where you might lose your mind, with pills and spills and thrills and morning. It's the nurse. I'm putting on the light. This is Roland. He's 55. He heaves himself over in bed on his side and his falls alarm stops beeping. The headline act? Early onset dementia. It's a care home silent disco where nobody seems to get you. You're a white label, mate, a test press, unreleased, an independent, now dependent, living a whole night in 1 week. This is your home now, and everyone here has lived 2 whole lives older on this calendar of tears. Charitable glances ask me why, as your nurse, I call you Roland. It's not your real name, but you sigh 606, 707, 808, 909. What's she on about? She's all Wigan and no casino, that one. And Roland, your eyes glaze over like mine. I tell them he loves drum machines. He lived the second summer of love. 1990s, factories, airfields, digital, analogue. Because being Roland's nurse isn't blood pressures and weights, it's not full name, any allergies. It's VIP room, guess this, mate. It's not date of birth, it's fate of birth. Back of the queue, pal. Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Roland, turn it up.
because I've medicines here for you. I've got a duty to give. So let's build this beat together and we'll help each other live, because I'm not going to reach you with Vera Lynn or Doris Day or with old wartime photographs and fake gramophones that don't play. I'm on your direct-driven decks, sending you a BPM. I put the needle on the record and let your track begin again. We're chasing pirate frequencies, and just as I lock on, something moves the aerial, and that's your signal gone. I'm calling you from a phone box on a rainy, damp M5 with a hardcore reveler's invite for your infidelity of the mind. Capsules burst through foil from the pressure of my thumb. It's a succession of repetitive beats like a sampled sub-bass drum. Soul-filled vocals pour in your labelled plastic cup. It's lifting now, piano roots, and your face starts to come up. Your quiet stare rolls past the sink to this pilot light of hope. It's a 12-inch record spinning your humanity over the scent of damp flannels and soap. You're back there now. And what that means is you're nearly here with me, yet I know that your lost child head stole our shared lucidity. But our eyes meet, our beats match. You take that cup in your hand, you swallow your tablets and you say thanks in a way that we both understand. Sorted, nurse. Sorted. Thank you.
Job of introducing you to Bex, who I've been working with. She is married to Ben, and they're the proud parents of two little cats, Lexi and Luna. They've recently been on holiday, and Bex tells me that Ben secretly wishes she would pack her bag more than half an hour before they leave. Working with her, I've been really struck by her steely, resolve and persistence, and I really invite you to hear her story.
It was a cold, drizzly February day in Leeds, and I was choosing rotations for the next stage of my medical training. I printed out all the options, cut out into individual strips of paper, and was trying to put them in some sort of order. I thought it would be helpful to have experience in the areas that were going to cut most during future scary shifts as a more senior doctor. I was in my pyjamas, sat on the cold wooden floor of our shared house, a back-to-back terrace where you could hear the neighbours sneeze, trying to put 122 slips of paper in some sort of order. I had to choose which specialities not to do. I'd done cardiology as my very first rotation as a doctor, so maybe it made sense to have experience elsewhere instead. I was surprised to feel sad about this. I loved my first job, but I thought I was just relieved not to be a medical student anymore, hovering awkwardly, trying not to be in the way, or accidentally following someone to the toilet because they've been kind to me. It was so good to feel like I was contributing, albeit slowly, and with many, many questions, and in that new doctor way of just trying to learn how all the admin works and not kill anyone. I loved it so much that I once got told off for skipping down the corridor. Or rather, my friends got told off because someone's been skipping down the corridor. I'd been fascinated by the heart before, but had maybe forgotten. When I was applying for my first degree, I'd written as a 17-year-old about how cool the cardiac conduction system was and how amazing it was that it was controlled by this tiny cluster of cells. Even though I might have forgotten, my grandma hadn't. She often asked me, do you still want to do hearts? I'm not entirely sure what she thought I was going to do to them. She later tried to get me a job in her local GP practice, even though I was A, not a GP, and B, lived 80 miles away. This is the same woman who would always knit me 2 jumpers as a child, because I had one grandma and my cousins had 2. She She would always encourage seconds at meal times because I was a growing girl, despite being well into adulthood. There's a certain type of character that does cardiology. I can't tell you what the characteristics of that person are, but I am not that person. I did the cardiology rotation, and I loved it. I learned something new every day, discovered it was a speciality where you could fix things, and I got to see people's actual hearts moving on a screen. There were old people and young, acute illness and chronic, and all the cardiologists seemed to genuinely enjoy their jobs. It was brilliant. I was hesitant to tell anyone I wanted to do cardiology. I was a girl doing core medical training. People often said, you want to do geriatrics. Even the cardiology supervisor, whom I told otherwise on several occasions. My imposter voice told me they were trying to tell me not to do it. A geriatrics consultant once asked me what I wanted to specialise in. And when I tentatively said cardiology, he said, "Oh, I thought you were normal." Others said, "You have to be really clever to do that." Sometimes there were other trainees who wanted to apply, and people would say, "They're definitely the right type of person for cardiology." I'm still not sure what that person is. Confident, determined, clever clearly seems to be a factor. Good at practical skills, maybe. They also all seem to be men. I've considered representation before, but had perhaps not realised its importance. I'm white British, grew up in the same country I've trained and worked in. I have no visible health problems. Despite gender and a few other hidden factors, I wasn't fully cognizant of the impact of not seeing people like you where you aspire to be. There was one female cardiology consultant out of about 30 in that department. There are 3 now. There was one registrar who's now one of those 3 who spoke about cardiology like an excited child. She loved her job more than anyone I'd encountered in medicine before. She made it seem more possible. I applied for cardiology. I still was not particularly vocal about it. I still thought people would think would laugh at me. I went for the interview on a day which happened to be my birthday, a day I was feeling so unwell that I'd also taken a toothbrush and toothpaste just in case I vomited. I watched people coming in and out of the many doors and kept my fingers crossed that I wouldn't be interviewed by someone who knew me. They would definitely think it was silly that I was applying. I was handed the scenario for the clinical station, a patient presenting with transient loss of consciousness. Perfect. There's loads to say on that. I could definitely answer well. I didn't. I crashed and burned. Don't really know what happened. I got my interview scores a while later, and I was right. I'd done badly on that station. Never mind. I didn't expect to get a job on the first go. I always knew I'd need a few cracks at this. About a month later, I got an email with the subject line, "New offer." I still have that email starred as important. I got home to my wonderful now husband, who handed me a glass of fizz, put on celebration by calling the gang an anti-social volume whilst we danced around the living room like children. I started my cardiology training and I was on night shifts in my first week. My first shifts as a medical registrar, the more senior role I'd been scared of those 2.5 years earlier, sat on a cold wooden floor. I definitely wasn't ready for this. Everyone said when you get to be a registrar, get to the point of stepping up, you'll feel ready. Nonsense. Registrars know everything. I definitely don't know everything. Thankfully, as it turns out, you don't need to know everything. Gradually I began to love it. It was so good to learn something new and do tasks other than discharge letters and fluid prescriptions. But I still had a tiny flicker of doubt. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to get that job. I did badly in that interview. I'd seen the scores. It was a mistake. I was waiting for someone to get in touch and say, "Ooh, unfortunately, it's been an error. We didn't mean to give you this job." I continued my training with the minor interruption from the global pandemic. I started at Leeds, a tertiary centre, having done 7 months of cardiology training before spending 4 months exclusively treating COVID patients. It was a steep learning curve, but I loved it. Also, after a little while, I decided that it had been too long now, with too much time and money spent training me, for it to be worthwhile them taking the job off me. So, just over a year into my training at Leeds, my grandma died, after a gradual and difficult deterioration with vascular dementia. I was phenomenally lucky to have my wonderful grandma until I was 35, but it hit hard all the same. We'd been close growing up, and my grandparents, but particularly my grandma, were a welcome source of calm and normal when things at home sometimes weren't. I still loved my job, but I became gradually more worn down. I was irritable, impatient, less empathetic. I eventually got a complaint from an A&E consultant, which, despite being a complaint, very kindly and insightfully inquired into my well-being. I referred myself to practitioner health and made an appointment on my day off. I then went to work on my day off for a training opportunity that took a little bit longer than anticipated. I rushed back, but I was late. I joined the appointment, flustered and sweaty, to a stern-looking GP, whom I hurriedly apologised to. She was not surprised that I'd gone into work on my day off. I burst into tears. She promptly suggested that I have some time off, 4 weeks at least, for burnout. I thought I was managing, but it's probably not okay to burst into tears because you think a stranger is angry at you. I didn't want to take time off. I couldn't take time off. I would be that person who can't hack it. Cardiologists don't have these kinds of problems. I spoke to my husband. I spoke to my supervisor, the same female consultant that had been a role model before, who said that people that matter won't care, and the people that care don't matter. I nervously drafted an email to the lead clinicians, somewhat of a mic drop email, sent just before a strike and a bank holiday weekend. Sorry, I'm going to be off for a while. I left the building as soon as possible after sending it, hyper aware of my surroundings, my tingling in my skin and my heart pounding in my ears, dreading running into anyone on my way out. I received only kind and supportive messages back. The break did me good. I wasn't a new person, but I was rested enough. I went back to work thinking everyone would be looking at me. In reality, no one cares. It's a massive department. Lots of people haven't even noticed I've been away, and I didn't feel the need to tell them I had, or why. The people that knew were mostly treating me normally. There were one or two who found out, who asked me how I was, with their head on one side, like I was terminally ill. That was odd. I moved the conversation on quickly. I thought that I was all for destigmatising mental illness. I just really did not want to be the person doing it. As time went on, I realised that this was different from any previous nadir in my mental health. This was burnout, or something anyone could experience. I realised this because just under a year later, I had natural deterioration in my mental health. A sneaky reminder of what that feels like. I'd been lucky enough not to have a bad episode of depression for a while. The odd blip here and there, but nothing dramatic. I did all the classics. Didn't eat, couldn't concentrate, barely audible speech, self-destructive thoughts. You know, just the fun ones. I restarted antidepressants, having been off them for 18 months, one of my longest stints since the age of 17. I got better, as I have done before, and as I will do again the next time this happens, which it will. I am a woman. I am a person who at times struggles with mental illness, but no one who knows me has ever known me in any other way. Regardless of what people think of me, good, bad, or frankly indifferent, it is all in this context, and being more vocal about it doesn't necessarily change that. Sometimes the comfort and reassurance of seeing others like me has been startling. So, I am the type of person to do this job, because I am a person doing this job. So fuck it, and you may as well be visible about it.
Good evening. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Christina, who's got a beautiful story to share with you about the joy of human connection. One of the things that I greatly admire about Christina is her big and generous heart, so it will be no surprise for you to hear that she's a trainee paediatric cardiologist where she gets to mend tiny broken hearts. She's also a very dedicated cat parent. Please give a warm welcome to Christina.
You've promoted me again, but hopefully in the future. It is the summer of 2016. I, a fresh new foundation year 1 doctor, am walking on the long corridors of Salisbury District Hospital, humming Disney songs to give me some spirit to carry on. Nearby, a lovely resident doctor is mourning life as she knows it after having lost the function of her lower body in a car accident. Disability, whether seen or unseen, mental or physical, can really feel like it stumps into your life without asking for permission, and it feels like it takes and takes and takes. However, I've been taught that it can also give back. Have you ever been so alone and lonely that you hug yourself in order to ease the grief? That you scream at the walls, hoping that they would respond back? That someone, just anyone, would see beyond that unable to maintain eye contact phase? I know I did 9 years ago when I moved to the UK. And it lasted for about 5 years, but it was probably the most difficult at the beginning. Foundation year training, especially the first year, is known to be character building. And I was on a very sort of challenging surgical job. But that, for the 25-year-old self that I was, that had never spoken English for more than, I don't know, an hour in school, not even in uni, that couldn't tell my parents about what I was going through, because they'd spent all their life savings for me to be here. The only international medical graduate in my cohort. This was all a scenario I'd not really planned for. It was therefore only natural that, as I was given 8 months to spend with the same team on two surgical jobs, that I was going to see that team as my NHS family. Welcoming especially temporary staff that move every 4 to 6 months, was not a skill that everyone in the hospital has. But on that specific team, the nurses, the healthcare assistants, the physios, the pharmacists, the cleaners, the porters, they all did, and I wish there was an award for it. When I had to leave after those 8 months, I wanted to put all these raw emotions that I felt into something that wasn't just a box of chocolates and a supermarket card. It just didn't feel right. So I painted 2 watercolour cards. Now I'm an amateur artist. I've never been exposed anywhere or whatever. I'm self-taught, and I was just experiencing watercolour at the time. But somehow it felt like the right thing to do. And because I felt like the outcast of the team, again, the only international graduate in my cohort, somehow the characters that I chose to represent myself and the team were Chip and Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast. Surprising for a paediatrician. If you don't know Disney or you don't know who Chip and Mrs. Potts is, that's fine, I've got you. You wouldn't be the first. Chip is teacup, small teacup, a chipped teacup, so it's the name, last of its set, and Mrs. Potts is a teapot that is Chip's mum. Chip is, or has struck me as a very mischievous, loving, passionate character. He's really brave, he at some point even saves Belle and her dad. Whilst Mrs. Potts is probably the most grounded character in the whole animation film story, she's nurturing, she's selfless. So you can probably understand why I chose those 2. And painting them on those 2 watercolour cards I left behind as I exited the staff room for the last time. And I've blossomed and folded with its ups and downs afterwards, and when I least expected it, like a golden thread of faith, when disabilities thumped into my life, I met Georgie. Georgie's a trailblazing GP trainee. She's lovely, and I'd admired her because I'd seen her before speaking. We met at a trade union conference in Liverpool. She was waiting outside for a taxi because, sadly, wheelchair accessible taxis like to be waited for and are quite difficult to find. And I was just generally lost. My sense of direction isn't great, even in the best of times. And we just bonded automatically. We bonded because we have this immense passion for fighting against injustice, for speaking for marginalised groups, and also for our experience as disabled neurodivergent doctors. We didn't really inquire into each other's past very much for a long time. We were too busy talking about art, about cats, about so many things that are a ray of sunshine in what sometimes feels like a cruel world that refuses to see beyond your mask, beyond your disability, beyond your wheelchair. And, life can be quite funny sometimes. The smallest gestures can ripple into someone's life and they least expect it. Georgie and I were finally talking about kind of the deeper bits of our past, bonding over the character building foundation training. And I mentioned those 2 surgical jobs, where apparently her mum had been working. She was actually off sick when I worked there because she was looking after Georgia after a car accident. But thanks to her, the nurses remembered me because we shared the same forename. Moreover, on the first and only time she visited me in Leeds, we went out for dinner and somehow we ended up talking about art and about the fact that we both like to now and have a bit more courage to share our art to express our feelings. And I, of course, mentioned those 2 watercolour cards that I've been so nervous about. I tend to not think about my work as being meaningful or having any value. And she's like, wait a second. When were you a surgical F1? When did all that happen? 2016 to 2017, I said. To which she replied, "This might be too good to be true, but I might have something for you." And then she went home, then a week passed. Didn't really think much of it. I was like, oh my gosh, maybe she just made something like that for someone else. Then, a week later, she sent me a message with a picture with those two same watercolour cards that I'd left 7 years prior onto that surgical ward. And at that point, all those years just washed over me like a weight blanket. Those moments, everything that I felt at the time. To which she also said, I was recovering from a car accident and the staff thought, knowing my mum, that me seeing these cards would make me feel better because I loved Disney. And they did. To think that we've been connected for so long, I've been part of her life and I've been by her side in the loneliest of my times. The lonely little me that was walking the world aimlessly on Disney songs. So, it made me think and realise that back then, I was healthy but alone, whilst now, I'm not alone anymore. Our friendship is videos, it's pictures, it's not really much words, but it's love and family. So, if for 1 second, for 1 moment, you feel like your authenticity, your feelings might not be appreciated or seen, maybe, just maybe, they're the string of hope that someone needs. Maybe, just maybe, it will boomerang back at you when you need it most. Thank you.
Privileged to introduce Kirsty, who I've been working with. Kirsty is, as you are about to discover, a remarkable human being, and she has many talents, 2 of which are, well, she would win Bake Off and Sewing Bee. Let's just put it that way. Kirsty.
As I have the relief of finally emptying my bladder after the poking and prodding of an ultrasound probe, it's mixed with unease as they need to do an internal scan. I go back into the room and Rob's moved over as they reposition the couch and off we go again. Then the doctor stops and she smiles. She looks over at Rob and says, "Come look at this, Dad." She points at a screen and a grainy black and white picture. You see that flicker there? That's baby's heartbeat. Smiles break out over our faces. We breathe out, our shoulders release. My jaw relaxes. Rob gives out an even bigger sigh when she confirms there's just the one tiny little heartbeat. We leave the hospital, a little bounce in our step, thinking of how far we've come since we swiped right and met all nervously in a pub. Moving in together, getting married, family trips and holidays, and thinking how different the next might be. 2 weeks later, we're back in the clinic. Rob's holding my hand and it's shaking and nervy again. This time the doctor doesn't smile. The room feels darker, more tense. There's no flicker in the grainy black and white picture. He's squeezing my hands a little bit more now and our shoulders have dropped, but this time it's sadness, not relief. Here we go again. Those words are almost familiar now. I'm sorry, there's no heartbeat. We thought the 3rd time was meant to be a charm. This isn't how we thought 9 months would change us. 9 months would change our world. 9 months since we entered the world of baby loss. But now we're under the care of the recurrent miscarriage clinic, and there are tests and medications and things we can do differently. And maybe, just maybe, some hope of growing and becoming a little family. 3 months later, we are back at the hospital, this time in A&E, and I'm holding Rob's hand. He and his sister are sat at his bedside when the team come in because there's something not right with Rob. It's a brain tumour. They can cut it out. He needs surgery tonight to relieve some pressure, and then in a week it'll be gone. So a week later, we squeeze into a lift. Me, Rob, with his legs dangling off the bed, the nurse and the porter. I hold his hand as we walk towards a set of ordinary brown double doors. Give his hand a squeeze, we share a kiss, we say I love you, he doesn't want to let go. A few more kisses and I love yous, and eventually we'll go through those double doors. My heart is racing in my chest, but all I can do now is wait. A while later, the neurosurgical reg comes and finds me and his sister and takes us up to see him. He's holding my hand and playing with my engagement ring. He knows we're there, but he's not fully awake. See, there have been seizures. As we stand in this bright white windowless room, who knows what time it is, but it's late and there are beeping machines. There are more seizures, some bleeding, and he scans. I hold his hand as we sit in another bright white room, this time looking up at a screen not for a flicker but for a line marking his heartbeat. There are more machines now, there's a ventilator whooshing and clicking. See, now we're on ICU. Now he's not awake. He's not ever going to be awake. He's not coming home. Time moves slowly now, friends and family gather round. It's so quiet but so loud. We tag team the hand holding and gather in the relatives' room. It's getting pretty hot and sticky, it's stifling in there, but we need to be together. Sharing, talking, laughing, crying, napping, eating. Tag teaming the hand holding and telling them we love them. At some point, the ICU registrar takes me, finds me on my own and asks if I'm okay, do I have any questions? Just one. Can you be an organ donor? We've talked about it, I know it's what he wants. At some point, we have a conversation with the organ donation nurse, and she finds me on my own and says, come with me, I think you've got more questions. She takes me off to another room, and somehow she knows I need a different conversation to the non-medical family, and she talks me through everything step by step. I realised I really needed that conversation, but would never have asked. I nip out for some fresh air because I realised that I need to tell work. But who do I call? How do I explain this? But I know exactly who to call. It's a consultant in my department who over the last few months has seen me and checked in, has allowed me to talk and cry without fuss. I call her and simply say he got worse, he's not coming home. We cry as she makes a list and offers practical help, and I fill in the details. She tells me not to worry about work, she will sort that, and now it's just the family and Rob. We gather again in that hot, sticky relatives room, all squeezed in together. His friends have gone now, and it's just family. The doctors come back in, and the testing's done, it's all confirmed, this is it. His brainstem dead. After a little while, everyone slowly leaves and it's just me and Rob. I'm handed a basket of knitted hearts to pick some matching ones, and I pick some bright and nice yellow ones. And then I start to spray them with his aftershave, and I don't just spray them, I mean I spray him, I spray them, I completely filled that room and it might have been a bit much. They move me over the bed and there's space for me to climb in, and I get in and rest my head on his chest in that perfect little nook in his clavicle. feel his chest rising and falling and listen to that familiar sound of his heartbeat. I play our wedding song, tell him that I love him, and then I fall asleep. And I mean, I really sleep for the first time in days. Just there, at home, in his arms, listening to his heartbeat. We take one final walk back towards those brown double doors. Squeeze his hand, kiss his forehead, tell him I love him and get no reply. Then off he goes again through those doors. I hand him over to the organ donation nurses. They've already collected his pyjamas, toiletries and tissues for his pocket, because he always had tissues. We share a playlist of songs for them to use when they're washing him after his surgery. And we even manage a little laugh as we talk about his karaoke prowess and singing ability, or lack thereof. I just know they'll take such good care of him. The next few days and weeks pass in a bit of a blur. My parents move in and look after me despite their own grief. I visit him in the chapel of rest, and the mortuary technician shares how they love his funky PJs covered in big leaves and dinosaurs. He always was a big kid. We meet the funeral director and we go through all the logistics, and then she sets down a pen, looks me in the eye and says, "Now tell me about Rob. I like to know who I'm looking after." A wave of something washes over me and I realise I picked the perfect person to look after him. After a while he's moved back to the funeral home and I get to see him there, and at the end of the visit she asks if I want to come back before the funeral, and I say yeah. She asks when, and then I hesitate. I want to say every day, as much as I can, but I'm worried that makes me weird. She sees my hesitation as she shares that when her mum died, she sat with her every day and had a cup of coffee. And so I find myself spending the next 10 or so days having a morning cup of tea at the funeral home with Rob. Save them the knowledge that it might be weird, but I'm not the only one. The next few months move in a bit of a haze, but I'm surrounded by love and support of friends and family and colleagues, both his and mine. They pop over for a cuppa, have a chat, check in, we go for walks and lunches, chat on the phone, spend afternoons in the pub sharing memories and jokes, and sometimes even at his expense. I found a charity called Widowed and Young. I join their online support groups and as a space where we can share our stories, ask questions. We're not alone. I join our local group and meet a complete stranger in a prep. She's a nurse and we spend hours pouring out our stories, and now she's sharing on our honed dark sense of humour. She just gets it. She's the best friend I wish I'd never met. By September time, someone shares on one of the groups that they used to watch Bake Off with their late wife, and asks if anybody wants to join on Zoom. And so that's how I found Tuesdays becoming the highlight of my week, start watching Bake Off on Zoom with a bunch of widows, sharing our week, our grief and our loved ones. See, I don't feel like the odd one out with these. They don't get awkward when I cry. The care for Rob didn't stop in this time. We were updated and contacted by the organ donation team. They checked in. We helped 7 people, 5 with organs and 2 with sight. We're often an appointment with his neurosurgical team so we can ask questions and see his scans and process what happened. The ICU team are in contact with us and offer visits to the unit. We complete a form for him to be entered in their book of remembrance. His sister and I take them up on a visit to the unit. We get to see the book. When we get there, we're met at the front of the hospital by one of the nurses and walked up to the ward. On our way, we have to walk past those double brown doors. It stops me in my tracks. My heart races. My respiratory rate goes up. It was like a smack in the face. You see, I didn't think about walking past these doors. They're just so ordinary, but so much has happened here. We continue on to the unit and I get to meet some of the nurses that looked after him, and I get to hug and thank them, especially the one that gave me one final cuddle. Through all of this, each time I returned to work, it was surrounded by support, by colleagues who listened and gave me the space and time to return at my own pace, who understood when I couldn't do an ICU review and gave me a heads up about hidden content in teaching. You see, in 1 year I lost 3 babies and became a widow. I also turned 36 and completed my penultimate year of registrar training. I was a doctor, patient and relative, sometimes all in the same week. I met the most broken version of myself. Yet in this time and that which followed, I was surrounded by the love and support of family, friends, professionals and colleagues, both old and new, who let hope show itself as they had the courage to sit in the discomfort with me. They didn't try to fix it or make it better, but allowed me to start to find my way through as I figure out who I am now.
Well, now that concludes our evening of storytelling. I'd like to invite all the storytellers and the coaches on their tissue onto the stage for a final thank you. This is just to say thanks to everyone for coming, for listening to understand.
This evening would not have happened without this woman. Her teamwork is amazing, her organisational skills, but I know she'll want me to say this, but it's true, her listening skills and her enthusiasm for the power of stories and having those shared with other people is remarkable, and